Hello. When you are a buyer and you're purchasing new property, you are going to be seeing new forms that you have never ever looked at before. So what I want to do is really give you a jump start and a head start on understanding what those forms are, so that when you do see them and you're actually filling them out for your own purchase, it's going to be a lot less stressful and easier because you can already have a little bit of this background under your belt. I'm Greg Hanner from Garden Realty, and let's jump right into it. So, many of the forms that you see, you'll be familiar with the first form, which is the buyer's representation form. This document is always in place before we start looking at properties, and the reason is we are not allowed to show you properties without written buyer's rep agreement, which is in place, and it mainly gives you the understanding and lets you know that you are having all of your information that's confidential, number one. Number two, you are in a situation where you've got someone in your corner. I, as a buyer's agent, will be representing you and putting your interests first. And the third thing is that buyer's representation agreement makes it clear that there's no cost to you for my work, because the listing agents will be paying, listing agents owners, the sellers, will be paying broker fees. So that's confirmation of buyer's rep agreement that goes with the offer at time of contract or offering. The other forms that you see here are common forms. This is something that we share with the attorneys. And then if we find unacceptable inspections, this will be a form we would fill out. Changing of dates would be in here. Hopefully that doesn't happen to you. Confirmation of offer submittal, I sometimes use. VA and FHA both have their own disclosure documents that are mandatory and required. And they are basically a form that outlines that appraisals have to come in and support the value. But jump right into this form. It's the purchase and sale agreement. That is the focus for today. So right now, let's take a look at this. The owners, or buyer and seller, really go into the top section, and we identify the property address. Right here in section 1, this is the price and deposit terms and financing. So what we do is we break down a purchase price into an initial deposit. Sometimes we will have a second deposit, and that second deposit would normally go and be paid after satisfactory inspections. Section 1C is where we put in your mortgage amount, and then seller financing is not very common, but then we just close out the math with section E, which covers the balance due at closing, and that has to be a bank check or a wire. Okay? So the financing will identify what type of mortgage financing are you going to use, or is it a cash transaction? We will also put in here typically 3 days after the contract is signed by the seller. We got to get you into your lender to get that mortgage process started. And that mortgage processing is happening in parallel with your home inspection efforts. The mortgage commitment date is the date and deadline that we would have for the mortgage to be completed. Your lender will typically be able to complete that in 4 to 6 weeks. Appraisal contingency is an interesting one, because up here we're identifying a purchase price. Well, this appraisal contingency is a third-party appraisal. If there is financing, it is required to have an appraisal support the value. And an appraiser will be hired by your lender. And it is not hired by the seller, it's your lender. You'll be paying for it as part of your closing costs, and that appraiser has to be able to support the value. If the value comes in lower than the purchase price, we'll have a conversation about it. The date will be put here in terms of the deadline for that performance. The other thing is we put in any seller's concessions, which can be basically, they call it prepaids and seller closing cost credits. What's interesting is some buyers think that the sellers are paying credits. Well, the seller is paying buyer's closing costs. The seller's not paying anything. If you see a number go into that box, the seller is just going to allow you to finance that number over and above the net to seller price. For example, on a $300,000 home, if you have $10,000 in closing costs and prepaid expenses, then it's $290,000 is what you are really paying the seller. And they are allowing you to finance that $10,000 in closing costs. Okay? So don't get confused and think that the seller is paying for it, because they are not. They are allowing you to finance those closing costs. Sometimes those closing costs and the escalation of the price can be a problem for appraisal. And if that's the case, we'll have another conversation. Adjustments happen at the end, right before closing, and that's for the taxes, and it could be for fuel in the tank. Those are the two typical ones. And this is a 4-page document. We're on page 2. Brokers involved get input into section 7. The counterparts and electronic signatures, basically faxing, texting, and email. All of that communication is part of this agreement, and I, as your buyer's agent, will be here, and the seller's agent will be identified there. Encumbrances: if there's sewer, water, or gas, there may be some assessments that would be paid by the seller over 5, 10, 15 years. If we are going to be assuming those liabilities, we want to know. Fixtures and personal property, we outline the appliances in this section right here. And it's good to note that basically when you see blinds, curtains, and curtain rods, only the curtain rods stay. The seller is allowed to take the curtains unless it's noted otherwise. So we'll look close to any of the personal property inclusion-exclusion forms that may be provided to us. The seller's disclosures and notifications: lead paint is in any home, could be in any home built before 1978. If that disclosure is given to you, you will put a checkbox, put your initials here. You'll also put your initials in this box right here if you receive a property condition disclosure report. That's only required for regular transactions. If it is an estate sale or a bank-owned sale, you will not be getting a seller's disclosure because there's no disclosures required. Carbon monoxide and smoke detectors, sometimes you will see at closing a $250 credit by the seller. Take that money, buy yourself some new smoke detectors. Otherwise, the seller will be signing an affidavit affirming that the detectors all work. Also, in terms of green fields or dumps, hazardous waste sites or hunting and sporting ranges, all that information along with schools, crime reports, that's public information that you as a buyer are obligated to find. Okay? The examination of premises. Basically, when you go to contract, you're accepting the home in the condition that it's in, subject to a mortgage possibly or home inspections. And the things that we see in the home now should be there when we get to a closing. And the seller is obligated to maintain the property, cut the lawn, for example, while we're waiting for a closing. So 2 months later, it should be a cut lawn, unless it's bank owned, and then those are as-is sales. Inspections and tests. This is a big section right here. So what happens is we identify when you'd have those inspections completed by, the date, the deadline for that inspection report date. And it's generally 7 to 14 days. We will also identify if you're going to be doing any lead paint testing. We'll also identify if you want to waive the inspections. You're not required to have inspections, and if you don't want to have them, you don't have to. Any inspections here that you want to have, we'll check them off, and you as the buyer pay for those inspections. We also will have the seller's responsibilities during these inspection periods identified, and typically there'll be, if there's a VA financing, there'll be the wood destroying organism inspection, aka termite inspection. That's right here, and the seller will always pay for that. The exposing of the septic tank is typically an seller expense, and the pumping is typically a seller expense. Rarely, but sometimes in bank-owned properties, we'll find out that we won't get the seller to have the heat on or the power on, and those bank sales can be tough, but we'll work through it if that's what you're doing. So, if any of these inspections are unsatisfactory, we have two choices. 14B is a no-go. You can just walk away from the deal, just written termination of the agreement and get all your deposit money back. The only cost to you is your inspections, and we'll just go buy something else if you were really turned off by the results of the inspections. Or you can ask for some repairs, or maybe it's a remedy like a credit toward your closing costs or a price reduction. But we will go through that, and this is all done in writing. Final walkthrough we do right before closing, and we're looking to make sure that there's no new damage to the home. And remember, it's broom clean, and broom clean means that the walls will have the picture hook holes in the wall. Maybe the picture hooks will still be there and the pictures are gone. But a seller doesn't repaint the interior of the unit. It's not like a rental that you're taking over. Occupancy, you don't move in before you own it. And you as a buyer can assign this to another buyer if you wanted to, but that's only if there's no seller financing involved. During the period of time while we're doing our inspection, getting our mortgage before the closing, the seller does have to keep the property insured, and they do have to maintain it. Deposit is held by an escrow agent, and typically it's going to be the listing broker. And that money is not paying any interest. It actually goes to the first-time home, CHFA, the first-time home buyer program, at 0.5%, if that, these days. Default. If you wake up the day before closing, and if you had satisfactory inspections and you had satisfactory mortgage commitment, and you just woke up and decided to not go and buy the property, you're going to lose your deposit. That's liquidated damages. The seller default, if they wake up one day and say, hey, I'm going to sell it to that cash buyer that's going to pay me an extra $50,000. Well, in order for them to do that, you would have to sign a release and allow them to do that by giving you your money back plus an amount equal to your deposit. And that you would not have to accept. It would be negotiable. Additional provisions go here, and that is the entire agreement. Nothing is done verbal. So congratulations, you have just seen what a purchase and sale agreement is, and next time you see it, it's going to have your name on it, and that means we have found the right property that you want to pursue, and fingers crossed, I hope we can get it for you. Any questions on the information that I just shared with you, let me know. Thank you.